My boss, a wellness influencer with 4 million followers, fired me on a Thursday. She did not offer severance. She did not look me in the eye. She sat across from me in her minimalist, beige-toned office, sipping a matcha latte from a ceramic mug that retailed for $80, and told me she was taking her brand in a more authentic direction. Her memoir, which I had ghostwritten every single word of over the last 2 years, was launching on Monday. She smiled the serene, heavily curated smile that had secured her a $2 million book advance. She told me she was holding space for my transition, and that she hoped I understood that her journey required a singular, unencumbered voice. I did not scream. I did not remind her of the missed birthdays, the 3 a.m. editing sessions, or the fact that the singular voice she was referring to was actually mine. I simply picked up the pen her lawyer slid across the table, signed my termination agreement, and told her I wished her luck on her press tour. Welcome back to Whispered Drama Stories. If you have ever been erased from your own masterpiece by someone who bought your brilliance and sold it as their own, this story is for you. Drop your first name and your city in the comments and subscribe before we go any further. Now, let me take you back to before the beige office and the termination papers. I need to explain the invisible architecture of the influencer industry, because to understand the depth of the theft, you must first understand the absolute, hollow emptiness of the person who committed it. My name is Mia. I am 29 years old. I have a master's degree in English literature, a student loan debt that dictates my waking hours, and a very specific, highly lucrative talent. I can mimic the voice of anyone. I can listen to a person speak for 30 minutes, absorb their cadence, their vocabulary, and their emotional blind spots. And I can produce prose that sounds exactly like them, only smarter, deeper, and infinitely more profound. 4 years ago, I was hired as a junior copywriter for Sloane Sterling. Sloane was 34. She was the absolute epicenter of the modern wellness aesthetic. She sold a lifestyle built on waking up at 5 a.m., drinking alkaline water, writing in gratitude journals, and presenting a life completely devoid of friction. Her Instagram grid was a flawless mosaic of neutral tones, linen dresses, and vaguely spiritual aphorisms. She was beautiful, she was relentless, and she possessed the intellectual depth of a puddle. Sloane did not write her own captions. She did not write her own newsletters. She did not write the scripts for her YouTube videos. When I was hired, my job was to take her fragmented, chaotic voice notes, often recorded while she was getting a lymphatic drainage massage or sitting in traffic in her Range Rover, and translate them into the poetic, vulnerable prose her audience devoured. "Mia," she would say, in a voice note, the sound of a turn signal clicking in the background. "I'm feeling really, disconnected today. The vibes are off. Can we do a post about, releasing toxic energy and embracing the current season? Make it sound deep." I would take that audio file, sit in my cramped, dark apartment, and write 500 words on the necessity of shedding the armor of our past selves to stand naked in the truth of our present. I would weave in metaphors about autumn leaves and cellular renewal. I would manufacture a profound emotional breakthrough out of absolutely nothing. The post would get 300,000 likes. Sloane would receive thousands of comments calling her a visionary, a healer, an old soul. She would reply to those comments with a white heart emoji. I would move on to the next assignment. For the first 2 years, I accepted this dynamic. It is the reality of ghostwriting. You are a mercenary of words. You trade your ego for a paycheck. Sloane paid me decently, not enough to match the value I was generating for her multi-million-dollar brand, but enough to keep me compliant. Then came the book deal. As Sloane's following tipped past the 3 million mark, the publishing houses came circling. An influencer with that kind of built-in audience is a guaranteed New York Times bestseller. They don't care if the influencer can write. They care that the influencer can sell. Sloane signed a $2 million advance with a major publisher to write a memoir meets manifesto about her journey from brokenness to alignment. It was to be the definitive text of her brand. The day she signed the contract, She called me into her office. "We are doing this together, Mia," Sloane had said, gripping my hands across her desk, her eyes wide and shining with what looked like genuine emotion. "I told my agent I couldn't do this without you. You know my voice better than I do. You know my soul. Writing an 80,000-word book is very different from writing a caption, Sloane," I replied cautiously. "It requires narrative structure. It requires months of dedicated drafting." I know, she insisted, waving her hand dismissively. "And you will be compensated. I want to give you 5% of the advance, $100,000, and I want you on the cover. Sloane Sterling, with Mia Vance. A co-author credit. This is going to change your life, Mia." I looked at her. I wanted to believe her. $100,000 would wipe out my student loans and give me the seed money to start my own editorial agency. A co-author credit on a guaranteed bestseller would launch my career into an entirely different stratosphere. "Do we have that in writing?" I asked, because I was a writer, and writers know that unwritten words do not exist. Sloane laughed, a light, airy sound. "I will have my lawyer draft the addendum to your contractor agreement next week, but we need to start outlining this weekend. The publisher wants the first 3 chapters in a month." I should have stopped working until the contract was signed, but the machine was already moving, and Sloane was a master at creating a sense of manufactured urgency. I started outlining. I spent my weekend building the structural skeleton of her life story, transforming her privileged, highly ordinary upbringing into a compelling hero's journey of overcoming hidden trauma. The addendum from her lawyer never arrived. Every time I brought it up, there was an excuse. The legal team was restructuring the LLC. The publisher was finalizing the formatting. She was waiting for the second tranche of the advance to clear. "Mia, don't be so corporate," she told me during a Zoom call, broadcasting from a luxury wellness retreat in Costa Rica. "We are co-creating magic. The money is coming. Trust the universe." I did not trust the universe. I trusted deadlines, and I trusted leverage. But I was already 6 months into the drafting process. I had already written 40,000 words. If I walked away, I would lose the book, the credit, and the money, and she would simply hire another ghostwriter to finish the blueprint I had already built. So, I kept writing. The process of ghostwriting Sloane's memoir was the most psychologically exhausting experience of my life. Sloane's contribution consisted entirely of weekly, hour-long phone calls where she would ramble about perceived slights, ex-boyfriends, and vague anxieties. She had no actual trauma. She had no profound realizations. I had to invent her depth. I wrote about the suffocating pressure of perfectionism. I wrote about the quiet, devastating loneliness of being perceived by millions but known by no one. I poured my own anxiety, my own isolation, and my own actual pain into the vessel of her name. I gave her my blood, and she put a beige filter over it. The book was titled The Audacity of Stillness. It was, objectively, a masterpiece of modern narrative nonfiction. The editor at the publishing house wept when she read the final manuscript. She sent an email to Sloane calling her the voice of a generation. Sloane forwarded the email to me with the message, "We did it. Pizza party next week to celebrate." There was no pizza party. There was only the sudden, terrifying realization that the heavy lifting was done, and I had outlived my usefulness. The shift in Sloane's behavior happened the moment the final galleys were locked for printing. Suddenly, I was excluded from the marketing strategy meetings. When I asked her assistant for the Zoom links, I was told it was an executive-level discussion. I noticed that Sloane stopped asking me to draft her daily captions. She was using a cheaper junior copywriter she had quietly hired 3 weeks prior. And then, the publisher released the official cover art for the book. I saw it on Instagram. Sloane posted it to her 4 million followers. The cover was a stunning, soft-focus portrait of Sloane looking thoughtfully off-camera. The title read, The Audacity of Stillness. The author line read, by Sloane Sterling. My name was nowhere on the cover. It was not on the spine. It was not on the title page. I sat in my apartment, staring at the glowing screen of my phone. I felt a cold, hard knot form in the center of my stomach. The knot was not surprise. It was the biological confirmation of a truth I had suspected for 18 months. I took a screenshot of the cover and texted it to Sloane. Mia, the cover looks great, but my with credit is missing. It took her 4 hours to reply. Sloane. Hey babe, I know, I'm so bummed. The marketing team at the publisher said having a co-author dilutes the personal brand. They really needed it to be a singular narrative, but you're going to be in the acknowledgments, I promise. The acknowledgments, a paragraph at the back of the book, buried between her thanking her Pilates instructor and her golden retriever. I stared at the text message. I did not reply. I opened my laptop, checked my bank accounts, and looked at my outstanding student loan balance. The next morning, I walked into the office. I knocked on Sloane's door. She was sitting at her desk, reviewing the schedule for her upcoming book tour. She looked up, her expression tightening slightly. She knew this conversation was coming. Sloane, I said, keeping my voice perfectly level. The co-author credit was a non-negotiable condition of my writing the book. You promised it to me a year and a half ago. Mia, please, she sighed, putting down her pen and adopting her signature look of wounded empathy. Don't bring negative energy into this launch week. My hands were tied. The publisher makes the final call on cover art. The publisher makes the call based on the contract you signed. I corrected her. You never negotiated the credit. Which brings me to the other half of our verbal agreement, the 5% of the advance, the $100,000. I expect the wire transfer by the end of the week. Sloane's expression dropped. The wounded empathy vanished, replaced by the cold, calculating glare of a CEO who is annoyed by a vendor demanding payment. Mia, you are a salaried employee of the LLC, Sloane said, her voice turning crisp. You were paid your monthly retainer for your copywriting services. Writing the book fell under your duties. Writing an 80,000-word memoir does not fall under a $50,000 a year copywriting retainer, Sloane. We had an explicit verbal agreement. Verbal being the operative word. Sloane countered smoothly. I appreciate your hard work, Mia. I really do. I will authorize a $5,000 performance bonus on your next paycheck. That is more than generous. $5,000 for 2 years of my life, for a book that was about to debut at #1 on the bestseller list and cement her career for the next decade. I looked at her. I looked at the framed motivational quotes on her wall. Radiate kindness. Speak your truth. I did not yell. I did not threaten to sue her, because I knew a verbal contract against a multi-millionaire's legal team was a losing battle. I simply nodded slowly. I understand, I said. Sloane exhaled, her shoulders relaxing. She thought she had won. She thought she had successfully bullied the quiet, introverted writer into submission. I knew you'd understand, babe. We're a team. I walked out of her office. I went back to my desk. I knew my days at the company were numbered. I had broken the cardinal rule of working for an influencer. I had reminded her of her own fraudulence. I had become a mirror she no longer wanted to look into. The termination came 3 days later, Thursday afternoon. I was summoned to the main conference room. Sloane was not alone. Sitting next to her was Elliot, the aggressive corporate attorney who managed her LLC. Sloane was wearing a beige cashmere sweater. She had an expensive crystal sitting on the table in front of her, probably for grounding her energy during a difficult conversation. Mia, have a seat, Elliot said, gesturing to the chair across from them. I sat down. I placed my hands flat on the glass table. We are executing a structural realignment of the brand, Sloane began, using the exact corporate jargon she despised, but deployed whenever she needed to avoid accountability. I am stepping into a new era of authenticity. The book is coming out, and I really need to ensure that the voice my audience hears moving forward comes exclusively from my own soul. You're firing me, I translated clearly. We are terminating your independent contractor agreement, Elliot clarified, sliding a thick stack of papers across the table. Effective immediately. Because you are classified as an independent contractor and not an employee, you are not entitled to severance under state law. I looked at the paperwork. They had deliberately misclassified me for years to avoid paying benefits, and now they were using that same misclassification to throw me out on the street without a dime. However, Elliot continued, tapping a specific paragraph with his expensive pen, Sloan is willing to offer you the $5,000 bonus she previously mentioned, provided you sign this comprehensive non-disclosure and non-disparagement agreement. This binds you in perpetuity. You may not claim authorship of the book. You may not discuss your role in the company publicly. If you violate this NDA, Sloan will sue you for damages that will bankrupt you. They were buying my silence for $5,000. They were terrified that I would go to the press during launch week and ruin the narrative of the authentic wellness guru. Sloan leaned forward, adopting a look of profound, sickening sorrow. Mia, I want to thank you for everything. You have been a beautiful part of my journey. But seasons change. I'm holding space for your transition, and I know you are going to shine somewhere else. I looked at the NDA. I read the clauses. I read the terrifying financial penalties if I ever spoke the truth. I picked up the pen. I didn't argue for more money. I didn't ask for a recommendation. I signed the NDA. I signed the termination paperwork. I pushed the stack back across the table to Elliot. Elliot looked mildly surprised. Lawyers are used to friction. They are not used to absolute, quiet compliance. Thank you, Mia, Sloan said, beaming with relief. The $5,000 will be wired by tomorrow. Keep it, I said, standing up. Sloan blinked. What? Keep the $5,000, Sloan, I said, my voice as calm and cool as the glass table between us. Consider it my contribution to your journey. I did not wait for her to respond. I walked out of the conference room. I packed the few personal items on my desk into a canvas tote bag. I walked out of the building into the bright afternoon sun, and I smiled for the first time in 6 months. Sloan believed she had successfully silenced me. She believed the NDA was an ironclad muzzle. She believed that because my name was not on the cover of the book, I had been permanently erased from it. But Sloan had never read the book. Not really. She had skimmed the chapters, approved the vibes, and forwarded the files to her publisher. She did not understand the mechanics of writing. She did not understand that when you give a ghostwriter total, unchecked control over an 80,000-word manuscript, you are handing them the keys to your entire kingdom. I knew she was going to betray me. I had known it 14 months ago when the lawyer's addendum never arrived. I had known it when she sat in Costa Rica and told me to trust the universe. And because I knew it, I had built an insurance policy into the very foundation of her masterpiece. Sloan was about to go on a national press tour to promote a book she had not written. She was going to sit on the couch of Good Morning America on Monday, and she had absolutely no idea what was buried in Chapter 4. To understand the absolute lethal beauty of an embedded cipher, you must first understand the relationship between a ghostwriter and their subject. When you ghostwrite a book for a celebrity or an influencer, you become intimately aware of their intellectual limitations. You know exactly what words they do not know how to define. You know exactly what concepts are too complex for them to grasp. And most importantly, you know their vanity. Vanity is the greatest blind spot in the human psychological spectrum. Sloan Sterling was a woman so consumed by her own reflection that she never bothered to examine the glass. When I was writing The Audacity of Stillness, Sloan did not read the drafts. She looked at them. She would scroll through the PDF documents on her iPad while getting a pedicure, scanning for buzzwords. She looked for words like trauma, alignment, healing, and manifestation. If the page looked visually dense, she assumed it was profound. She did not read the architecture of the sentences. She certainly did not read the first letter of every paragraph. I spent my first weekend of unemployment in my apartment, watching the aggressive, multi-million-dollar marketing campaign for the book blanket the internet. Sloan was everywhere. She was on the cover of wellness magazines. She was doing hour-long podcasts with other influencers, talking in that soft, breathy, manufactured voice about the vulnerability of writing her truth. She posted an Instagram reel of herself unboxing the first physical hardcover copy of the book, crying perfectly calibrated tears as she held it to her chest. "This book is my soul on paper," she wrote in the caption. Every single word came from the deepest, most broken parts of me. I sat on my couch, drinking black coffee, and watched the reel. I didn't feel angry. I felt the precise, humming anticipation of a demolition expert watching a corrupt CEO cut the ribbon on a building that is already rigged with explosives. Let me tell you about Chapter 4. Chapter 4 of the memoir was titled Reclaiming the Authentic Voice. Sloane had requested a chapter about how she learned to stop listening to the noise of the world and start listening to her own internal truth. It was a deeply ironic request, considering her internal truth was currently being generated by an underpaid, exhausted 29-year-old sitting in a studio apartment. I wrote Chapter 4 14 months ago, right around the time Sloane went to Costa Rica and told me to trust the universe regarding my promised $100,000 bonus and co-author credit. That was the week I realized she was going to steal the book, and that was the week I built the trap. An acrostic cipher is a code where the first letter of each line, or, in this case, each paragraph, spells out a specific message. It is incredibly difficult to execute in a published, commercially edited book because paragraphs are subject to the brutal red pen of New York publishing editors. If an editor decides a paragraph is too long and splits it, the code breaks. If an editor decides 2 short paragraphs should be combined, the code breaks. I had to engineer 28 consecutive paragraphs that were so structurally sound, so grammatically flawless, and so rhythmically perfect that no editor would dare touch the formatting. The message I chose was exactly 28 letters long. I wrote this book. She paid me nothing. I started the drafting process on a Tuesday night. Paragraph 1 began with, "Isolation is rarely a choice we make consciously. It is usually a defense mechanism we build silently." Paragraph 2. When the walls finally closed in around me, I realized that my silence wasn't protecting me. Paragraph 3. Radiating a false positivity became my armor. Paragraph 4. Only by breaking that armor could I finally breathe. Paragraph 5. To heal, I had to confront the void. Paragraph 6. Every morning became a battleground for my own authenticity. It took me 40 hours to write the 15-page chapter. It was the hardest I had ever worked on a piece of writing in my life. I had to consult dictionaries for specific emotive adjectives that fit Sloane's brand voice while matching the strict structural demands of the cipher. When the manuscript went to the publishing house in New York, the senior editor sent back notes. She loved Chapter 4. She called it the emotional climax of the first act, but she suggested combining paragraphs 21 and 22 for better narrative flow. If I combined them, the D and the M in paid me would merge, destroying the syntax of the trap. I spent an hour on the phone with the New York editor, fiercely defending the paragraph break. I used advanced literary terminology. I argued that the hard break represented the fractured psychological state of Sloane's healing process. The editor was so impressed by my artistic defense that she yielded immediately. The 28 paragraphs remained perfectly intact. The book went to the printers. Millions of copies were bound, shipped, and stacked on the tables of every major bookstore in the country. And in every single copy, on page 84, sitting in plain sight, was my confession. But a code is useless if no one knows how to read it. I had signed a comprehensive non-disclosure and non-disparagement agreement. Elliot, the aggressive corporate lawyer, had drafted it to be legally impenetrable. If I went on Twitter and claimed I wrote the book, Sloane would sue me for breach of contract, seize my assets, and bankrupt me. If I went to a journalist and gave an interview, Sloane's PR machine would instantly discredit me as a disgruntled, fired employee looking for 15 minutes of fame, and then she would sue me. I could not speak. The NDA legally silenced my voice, but the NDA did not silence the book. The book belonged to Sloane. Her name was on the copyright. The text was her legal property. And if her legal property contained a hidden message that disparaged her, I wasn't technically breaking the NDA. The book was simply speaking for itself. I just needed to point someone's eyes in the right direction, and I needed to do it on the biggest, most unforgiving stage possible. The launch of The Audacity of Stillness was scheduled for Monday. To kick off the launch week, Sloane's PR team had secured the holy grail of daytime television, a live, 10-minute sit-down interview on Morning America. Morning America is watched by 5 million people. It is the premier promotional vehicle for celebrity memoirs. But more importantly, the Monday anchor was a woman named Helen Crofties. Helen Croft was 62 years old, a veteran journalist who had covered actual wars, presidential elections, and global economic crises. She possessed a razor-sharp intellect and a legendary lack of patience for manufactured celebrity fluff. She was regularly forced by her network producers to interview influencers to capture the younger demographic, and she visibly despised every second of it. Helen did not suffer fools. She was the perfect executioner. On Sunday night at 11 p.m., I sat at my small kitchen table. I opened my laptop. I activated a military-grade virtual private network, VPN, routing my IP address through a server in Switzerland. I created a secure, encrypted, untraceable burner email account. I found the public email address for Helen Croft's senior producer and the direct tip line email for Helen herself, which I had sourced from a journalist friend years ago. I typed a very brief, completely anonymous email. Subject: Sloane Sterling's book, A Closer Read. Ms. Croft, you are interviewing Sloane Sterling tomorrow morning regarding her memoir, The Audacity of Stillness. Before you go live, I suggest you take 30 seconds to look at Chapter 4, page 84. Read the first letter of every paragraph in that chapter, in order, from paragraph 1 to 28. The author is lying to you. I did not attach any documents. I did not include my name. I just provided the map to the buried treasure. I pressed send. I closed the laptop, took a hot shower, and went to sleep. I slept deeply, dreamlessly, with the profound serenity of a woman who has done everything she can and is now leaving the rest to gravity. Monday morning arrived. I woke up at 6:30 a.m. I made a pot of strong black coffee. I did not check my phone. I turned on my television and switched the channel to the national broadcast of Morning America. At 7 a.m., the show opened with its usual energetic theme music. Helen Croft sat at the polished glass anchor desk, wearing a sharp crimson blazer. Next to her sat her co-anchor, a perpetually smiling man named David, who handled the lighter, entertainment-focused segments. "Good morning," Helen said, her voice carrying the authoritative weight of a 30-year career. "Coming up in our 8 o'clock hour, we have an exclusive interview with wellness mogul Sloane Sterling, whose highly anticipated memoir hits shelves today." They cut to a promotional graphic of the book cover, followed by a short, pre-taped B-roll video of Sloane walking thoughtfully along a beach, looking incredibly serene. I pulled out my phone and opened Instagram. Sloane had just posted a story from the Morning America green room. She was sitting in a makeup chair, wearing a stunning white power suit, her hair styled in effortless waves. "Good morning, beautiful souls," Sloane whispered into her phone camera, holding her branded matcha latte. "I am backstage at Morning America. I am so overwhelmed with gratitude today. This book is my heart. I poured every ounce of my truth into these pages, and I can't wait to share it with the world. Tune in at 8. She blew a kiss to the camera. The story ended. I set my phone face down on the table. I drank my coffee. At 7:45 a.m., I watched the television screen intently. In live broadcasting, the anchors usually sit at the desk while commercial breaks roll, reviewing their notes for the upcoming segment. Occasionally, the camera will cut back to them a few seconds early to show them prepping. During the bumper before the 8 a.m. hour, the camera cut to the anchor desk. Helen Croft was not smiling. She was not bantering with her co-anchor. Helen was sitting perfectly still, holding a hardcover copy of The Audacity of Stillness. She had a silver pen in her hand. She was looking at page 84. Even through the television screen, I could see the exact moment the cipher clicked in her brain. Helen's eyes darted down the left margin of the page. She moved her pen, lightly circling the first letter of the first paragraph, I, then the second, W, then the third, R. She traced her pen all the way down the page, her lips moving almost imperceptibly as she spelled out the hidden message. When she reached the end of the 28th paragraph, the G in nothing, she stopped. Helen Croft lifted her head. She looked off camera, presumably toward her executive producer in the control room. Her expression was not one of confusion. It was the expression of a veteran journalist who has just been handed the most explosive, viral piece of live television gold in her entire career. A slow, predatory smile spread across Helen's face. She closed the book, kept her finger marking page 84, and set it down on the glass desk. The commercial break ended. "Welcome back to Morning America," the smiling co-anchor David said to the camera. "If you've spent any time on social media in the last few years, you know our next guest. With 4 million followers and a booming lifestyle brand, she has become the ultimate guru for finding peace in a chaotic world. Her debut memoir, The Audacity of Stillness, is out today." The camera panned to the secondary interview set, a cozy arrangement of plush armchairs. Sloane Sterling sat opposite Helen Croft. Sloane looked radiant. She was sitting with perfect posture, her hands folded in her lap, projecting the absolute epitome of enlightened calm. She had spent 2 hours in hair and makeup preparing for this exact moment. She was ready to talk about her trauma, her healing, and her brilliant journey as an author. Helen Croft sat across from her. Helen was holding the book in her lap. "Sloane, welcome," Helen said. Her voice was polite, perfectly professional, but lacking the warm, sycophantic tone typical of celebrity interviews. "Thank you so much for having me, Helen," Sloane beamed. "It is such an honor to be here and to share my truth with your audience." "Your truth," Helen repeated. She let the 2 words hang in the air for a fraction of a second longer than was comfortable. "This book has generated a massive amount of buzz. The publishing industry is calling it a profoundly intimate look into your mind. You've said on your social media that writing this was the hardest thing you've ever done." "It was grueling," Sloane answered, placing a hand over her heart, deploying the exact script her PR team had rehearsed with her. "When you write a memoir, you have to bleed onto the page. There were nights I was up until 3 a.m. just crying over my keyboard, trying to find the exact right words to express the pain I was going through. But I knew I had to do the work. I couldn't outsource my soul. I sat in my apartment watching her tell a live audience of 5 million people about the tears she shed over a keyboard she never touched. The sheer terrifying sociopathy of her lie was staggering. She didn't just steal the work. She was aggressively claiming the emotional suffering required to produce it. "It's a beautifully written book," Helen noted, looking down at the hardcover in her lap. "The prose is remarkably elevated. I was particularly struck by Chapter 4. You titled it, Reclaiming the Authentic Voice." "Yes," Sloane nodded enthusiastically, completely oblivious to the trap she was walking into. "That chapter is really the core of the book. It's about stripping away the lies we tell the world, and finally speaking with absolute, unfiltered honesty." "Absolute honesty," Helen murmured. "Exactly." Sloane smiled. Helen opened the book. She turned to page 84. "You know, Sloane, I've been a journalist for a very long time," Helen began, her tone shifting slightly. The polite daytime television cadence dropped, replaced by the sharp surgical precision of a news anchor moving in for the kill. "And part of my job is reading carefully. Not just reading the words, but reading the structure of the text." Sloane's smile wavered, just slightly at the edges. She wasn't used to interviewers diverging from the pre-approved PR script. "Structure is so important," Sloane agreed vaguely, trying to maintain her serene composure. "It is," Helen agreed. She picked up her silver pen and tapped it against the open page. "In fact, the structure of Chapter 4 is quite fascinating. Because if you read this chapter normally, it is a very moving essay about finding your truth. But if you read it a different way, it tells an entirely different story." Sloane blinked. I'm not sure what you mean, Helen." "I received an interesting tip this morning," Helen said, looking directly into Sloane's eyes. "It directed me to look closely at the paragraph structure of this specific chapter, the chapter about honesty, and I found something remarkable." The control room director, sensing the sudden shift in tension, cut to a tight, close-up shot of Sloane's face. The radiant confidence was evaporating in real time, replaced by a rigid, wide-eyed confusion. She had no idea what Helen was talking about. She hadn't read the book. "Sloane," Helen said, her voice ringing clear and loud across the live broadcast. "Did you write this book?" Sloane let out a nervous, breathless laugh. "Of course I did, Helen, every word. Are you absolutely certain about that? Helen pressed, not letting her off the hook. Yes, Sloane insisted, her voice pitching slightly higher. I mean, I had an editor at the publishing house, like all authors do, but the words are mine. Helen nodded slowly. She held up the book, turning the open page toward the camera. Let's look at page 84, Helen said. The first paragraph begins with the word isolation. The letter I. Helen moved her pen down to the next paragraph. The second paragraph begins with when. The letter W. The third begins with radiating. The letter R. Sloane was staring at the book. She still didn't comprehend what was happening. She was trying to smile, but her face looked frozen, a mask of panic slowly cracking under the hot studio lights. If you take the first letter of every single paragraph in this chapter, Sloane, Helen continued, her voice mercilessly calm, in consecutive order from paragraph 1 to paragraph 28, it spells out a very specific 28-letter sentence. Helen looked back at Sloane. Do you know what that sentence says, Sloane? Sloane opened her mouth. No sound came out. She looked off camera toward her publicist, sheer terror radiating from her eyes. The letters spell out the following message, Helen said, reading clearly and deliberately for the 5 million people watching at home. I wrote this book. She paid me nothing. The silence that fell over the live broadcast was deafening. It was the sound of a $2 million empire hitting a brick wall at 200 miles an hour. Sloane Sterling sat frozen in her armchair. The beige filter had finally been ripped away. She was live on national television, exposed not just as a liar, but as a fraud who hadn't even bothered to read the book she claimed was her soul on paper. Helen Croft closed the book with a sharp, definitive snap. So, I will ask you one more time, Sloane, Helen said. Did you write this book? The silence on a live television broadcast is fundamentally different from normal silence. It does not feel empty. It feels heavy, compressed, and electric, with the absolute panic of the producers in the control room trying to figure out if they should cut the feed. For 5 agonizing seconds, Sloane Sterling sat frozen on the plush armchair. Her mouth opened, then closed. She looked at Helen Croft. She looked at the book. Then she looked off camera toward the wings of the stage, her eyes wide and pleading, desperately searching for her publicist to save her. But a publicist cannot step onto a live set in front of 5 million people. Sloane stammered. Her voice, usually a breathy, curated whisper of wellness, sounded entirely unmoored. Helen, I don't know what you are talking about. That has to be a coincidence, a typo. Helen Croft did not blink. She did not offer a lifeline. She sat with the absolute predatory stillness of a journalist who has just trapped her prey in the crosshairs. A coincidence, Helen repeated, her voice perfectly flat. Sloane, it is a 28-letter sentence, spelling out a grammatically perfect confession of intellectual theft, structured seamlessly into the opening lines of 28 consecutive paragraphs. The mathematical probability of that being a typo is effectively 0. My team, Sloane choked out, her perfectly contoured face slick with sudden, panicked sweat. I had a team who helped with the formatting. They must have. I am the author of the ideas, Helen. The ideas are my soul, but I am not a typist. You are not a typist, Helen noted, writing the phrase down on her legal pad. But, an hour ago, on your Instagram, you told your 4 million followers that you poured every ounce of your truth into these pages. And just moments ago, you told me you spent nights crying over your keyboard. Sloane was hyperventilating. The serene, beige-filtered illusion of the wellness guru had been completely shattered, revealing the terrified, hollow shell underneath. We co-created it, Sloane gasped, completely abandoning her NDA, abandoning her PR script, abandoning everything in a desperate bid to survive the ambush. I had an assistant. She was disgruntled. She must have done this to sabotage my launch. So you did not write the book, Helen concluded smoothly, delivering the final lethal strike. Sloane stared at her. She realized, a second too late, that she had just confessed to the fraud on national television. Thank you for your time, Sloane, Helen said, turning smoothly to the main camera. The book is The Audacity of Stillness. It is available in bookstores everywhere today, though readers may want to look a little closer at the text. We'll be right back after this commercial break. The broadcast cut to a bright, cheerful commercial for laundry detergent. I sat in my small apartment holding my coffee cup. I did not cheer. I did not laugh. I simply took a slow, deep breath, feeling the profound, quiet satisfaction of a woman who had just watched gravity do exactly what gravity does. By 8:15 a.m., the internet had exploded. In the modern digital age, a scandal does not simmer, it detonates. Within minutes of the broadcast, Twitter was trending with two hashtags, hashtag Sloan Sterling fraud and hashtag she paid me nothing. TikTok sleuths immediately downloaded the Kindle version of the book, screen recording themselves flipping to chapter 4 and verifying the cipher in real time. Bookstagrammers who had received advance review copies posted furious videos, claiming they had been manipulated into promoting a stolen manuscript. Sloane's follower count, which had taken her 5 years to build, began to plummet by the tens of thousands every hour. At 9:30 a.m., my cell phone rang. The caller ID displayed the name of Sloane's corporate legal firm. It was Elliot. I let it ring 3 times. Then, I answered, pressing the phone to my ear. "Hello, Elliot. You breached the NDA," Elliot screamed. He was not using his smooth, intimidating lawyer voice. He was yelling with the raw, unfiltered rage of a man watching his most lucrative client's empire burn to the ground. "You vindictive little sociopath. I am going to sue you into oblivion. I will take every cent you ever earn for the rest of your life." I walked over to my window, looking down at the quiet street below. I kept my voice perfectly, maddeningly calm. "I haven't breached anything, Elliot," I said. "You planted a defamatory message in my client's intellectual property," he roared. "You contacted the press. I am drafting the lawsuit right now." "Are you?" I asked mildly. "And what exactly is the foundation of your lawsuit?" "The non-disclosure agreement explicitly states that I am legally barred from publicly claiming authorship of the book, and that I cannot disparage Sloan Sterling to the media. I have done neither of those things. You put a cipher in the text." "I submitted a manuscript," I corrected him. "A manuscript that Sloan Sterling, as the credited author and CEO of her brand, had a legal obligation to review, edit, and approve. She signed off on the final galleys. She submitted it to the publisher under her own name. She claimed legal ownership of the text. I did not go to the press, Elliot. The book went to the press. And if Sloane's own legal property happens to contain a structural anomaly that embarrasses her, that is a failure of her own editorial oversight." "You sent the tip to Helen Croft," he accused. "You cannot prove that," I said. "And even if you could, an anonymous email suggesting a journalist read a published book closely is not a breach of a non-disparagement clause. I simply recommended a careful reading of a public text." Elliot was breathing heavily into the receiver. He was a ruthless corporate attorney, but he was not stupid. He was doing the legal calculus in his head, and he was arriving at the exact same terrifying conclusion I had reached months ago. "Furthermore," I continued, my voice dropping into a cold, clinical register, "think very carefully before you file a lawsuit, Elliot. To sue me for breaching the NDA by planting that code, you have to formally state, in a court of public record, that I am the sole unedited author of the text. You have to legally admit that Sloan is a complete fraud. The lawsuit itself will be the final nail in her coffin." Silence fell over the line. I had checkmated him. He couldn't sue me without destroying his client's last shred of deniability. The NDA was designed to be a muzzle, but I had turned it into a straitjacket, and he was the one wearing it. "She is going to lose her brand deals," Elliot said, his voice dropping to a defeated, hoarse whisper. "Her publisher is already talking about recalling the books." "That sounds like a difficult transition," I said, echoing the exact sterile corporate jargon they had used to fire me. "I'll hold space for her journey. Goodbye, Elliot." I hung up the phone. I blocked the number. The collapse of Sloan Sterling's empire was spectacular, absolute, and mercilessly fast. The publishing industry does not tolerate public humiliation. By noon on Monday, the publisher released a formal statement. They announced that they had been grossly misled regarding the authorship of the memoir. They immediately canceled Sloane's national book tour. but they did not recall the book. Instead, the publisher capitalized on the viral infamy. The Audacity of Stillness sold out on Amazon within 6 hours, not because people wanted wellness advice, but because they wanted to own a physical copy of the greatest literary Trojan horse of the decade. People were buying the book purely to turn to page 84 and see the cipher for themselves. Sloane was dropped by her major sponsors. Athletic wear brands and organic skincare lines do not want their products associated with a woman who lied on national television. She posted a tearful 7-minute apology video on YouTube, wearing a gray sweatshirt and no makeup, claiming she had been overwhelmed and had relied too heavily on her team. The internet tore her to shreds. The comment section was a graveyard of her reputation. You cannot sell authenticity once the world knows you bought it at a discount. 2 weeks later, the dust began to settle. Sloane had retreated from the internet entirely, her Instagram grid frozen on the now infamous cover of the book she didn't write. It was a Wednesday afternoon when my phone rang again. This time, the caller ID did not say Elliot. It displayed a New York area code. I answered it. Mia Vance speaking. Mia, it's Sarah. I recognized the voice immediately. It was the senior editor at the publishing house in New York, the woman who had wept over the manuscript. The woman I had spent an hour arguing with on the phone to protect the paragraph break in Chapter 4. Hello, Sarah, I said. I have spent the last 2 weeks analyzing that phone call we had about the fractured psychological state of the paragraph formatting, Sarah said. Her voice was a mixture of profound professional embarrassment and sharp, undeniable respect. You played me. I protected the architecture of the text. I corrected her gently. Sarah let out a short, sharp laugh. You destroyed a $2 million author. I destroyed a $2 million influencer, I said. The author is currently sitting in her apartment in Chicago, and she is available for hire. There was a pause on the line. In the publishing world, virality is currency. Sloane was radioactive, but the ghostwriter who had engineered a flawless acrostic cipher to expose her was a folk hero. The entire literary community was obsessed with the sheer, calculated brilliance of the trap. Your writing is exceptional, Mia, Sarah said softly. The prose was never the problem. The problem was the face on the cover. The face on the cover is no longer relevant, I said. The publisher wants to offer you a blind meeting, Sarah said, getting down to business. No NDAs, no ghostwriting. We want to hear your pitches. We want to know what you can do when you aren't forced to write through the beige filter of a wellness guru. I looked around my small studio apartment. I looked at the stack of unpaid bills on the counter. I thought about the $100,000 Sloane had promised me, and the $5,000 she had tried to buy my silence with. I had lost the bonus. I had lost my job, but I had gained something infinitely more valuable. I had gained leverage. I have 3 original manuscript concepts, I told Sarah, and I will be bringing my own intellectual property attorney to the meeting. We can schedule it for next Tuesday. I look forward to it, Mia, Sarah said. I hung up the phone. I walked over to my desk, opened my laptop, and began to write. Not for Sloane, not for a brand, for me. That is the whole story. Now, here is what I want to leave you with. We live in a culture that worships the aesthetics of success. We applaud the people who stand on the stage, the people who hold the microphone, the people whose faces are printed on the covers of magazines. We are taught to believe that visibility is the same thing as capability. It is not. There is an entire invisible workforce of brilliant, exhausted people quietly building the foundations that the arrogant and the wealthy stand upon. There are ghostwriters, junior architects, research assistants, and logistical managers who pour their blood into masterpieces that will never bear their names. The people at the top believe they are untouchable because they hold the capital. They believe they can buy your mind, erase your name, and hand you a fraction of the profits while demanding your gratitude. They rely on your silence. They rely on the assumption that you are too scared, too poor, or too legally bound to fight back. But true brilliance cannot be permanently erased. It leaves fingerprints. If you are the person writing the words, building the code, or engineering the structure, do not despair when someone else tries to take the credit. Let them put their name on the cover. Let them go on television and claim your genius as their own. Just make sure that before you hand over the keys to the castle, you bury a bomb in the foundation. Make it flawless. Make it structurally sound. And when the time is right, let their own vanity be the thing that pushes the detonator. Never forget that the person who knows how to build the machine is also the only person who knows exactly how to take it apart. Tell me in the comments your first name and your city. Tell me if you have ever sat quietly while an incompetent boss took credit for your late nights and your heavy lifting. Tell me if you left a trap door waiting for them. For more stories like this one, come find us on the channel. Every story here is about someone who refused to be erased and decided instead to rewrite the ending. Subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.